Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church into the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Now, here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today I'm welcoming Eric Hoke to the show. Eric is a co-vocational church planter and proven marketplace professional specializing in staffing and corporate training. He has worked with thousands of eager career changers from around the world, including church planters, missional church leaders, and pastors transitioning from ministry to break into the corporate world to sustain their ministries. With 15 plus years of ministry experience, a Master's of Arts in Biblical Literature, and a 3-year fellowship with the Redeemer City to City, Eric understands pastors and what it takes to lead church in a modern world. A sought-after international speaker, he has trained over 100,000 professionals from brands like Uber, American Express, Moderna, and Salesforce, and is widely regarded in the corporate world. His insights have been featured on podcasts, online, and in print on platforms like Relevant Magazine, New Breed Training, and his New York City church plant story is featured in the book Next Wave, Discovering the 21st Century Church. As a certified master coach, he can help any pastor with a problem of how to rebrand confusion and break into the corporate world to supplement their income and build a ministry of sustainability for their families. All right, welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. I am Lauren Richmond Jr. Today, I'm welcoming Eric Hoke to the show. So thanks so much for being here, Eric. Anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you?
Nothing I can think of right now, but looking forward to having a conversation with you, Lauren. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation. So share, if you would, kind of about your Christian story, what it looked like for you early coming to the faith, what that looks like today.
Yeah, I'll start off very, very high level. I grew up in a nominal Christian home. My mother was Episcopalian. My father came from the Church of the Nazarene. Their kind of meet in the middle road was the United Church of Christ that we attended on Christmas and Easter only. Got confirmed at 14 through that church, and then decided that church was not for me. Had an uncle who was and still is a Southern Baptist pastor. Started attending his youth group later on in high school, which is where I became more serious about my faith and was baptized at 18. Went to Liberty for undergrad to study to become a pastor myself. And that took me on a very long and windy road. I won't go into all the details, but I spent some time as a missionary in Southern Africa, a youth pastor in New Jersey, an executive pastor in Queens, New York, a church planter in the Bronx, New York, where I currently live, and actually just transitioned from that role as of this recording about a month and some change ago. So that's kind of the very high level story of my faith background.
Yeah, we're both in a period of transition here, it sounds like. From my faithful listeners here, please, Eric, some folks might immediately write you off being from Liberty, but we'll have to.
Well, I hope you know
stay with you.
The funny thing about me is I'm totally a mutt. Like I said, I grew up with an Episcopalian mother and went to the United Church of Christ as a kid, and went to actually Nyack College for seminary. I was trained under Tim Keller and all those guys. And yeah, man, it's funny because last Sunday was my first Sunday where I wasn't a pastor at a church. So my family went to St. Mark's Episcopal Church on Madison Avenue, Upper East Side, very progressive church. So I'm sort of a spiritual mutt. Is the easiest way to put it. And to be fair, throw me some charity before we stop the recording. When I attended Liberty many moons ago, it was not the place it is today. We'll leave it at that.
What are some spiritual practices that you find meaningful, support you in your life? Yeah,
man. Well, let me kind of go big picture. I'm a full-time job. I help pastors get jobs as kind of a side hustle. Former church planter in an urban context. I'm also a father of 3 children. The eldest is going to be 5 next month. So my life is very full and very busy. 2 things that really help me. I'm a big fan of the Daily Examine or Daily Offices. I actually have the Divine Hours right here next to me by Phyllis Tickle. Big time recommend that resource. And then that's like my day-to-day. And then every year for my birthday, I go to a Benedictine monastery in Western New York and pray with the monks for the weekend. And that's kind of my retreat to myself. So a lot of times in contemplative prayer and reflective prayer and centering prayer, that's sort of my regular spiritual practice.
Okay, well, again, for our listeners, he just said Phil's tickle, so that should get him back.
Okay, good.
That should get him back, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, this guy's confused. Yes, yeah, I am.
Well, you kind of hinted at that there, that you have this side hustle of helping pastors get jobs. So recently, I've been kind of doing a lot of work on this personally, and I might say professionally. And I think anyone listening to this who's a pastor, anyone who's listening to this who's highly involved in their church and has some clue of what their church is paying their pastor, probably knows that most churches can't pay pastors what they need. So, I mean, I primarily come at it from a mainline Protestant perspective. I'm guessing you probably have some, just based on your story, some familiarity from both sides. Why don't you talk about the issue as you see it?
Yeah. So to kind of go backwards, when I planted the church in the Bronx, I was always a co-vocational / bivocational planter. So the community in which I started the church is actually the poorest congressional district in the United States. People are often surprised to hear that exists in New York City. Most of us would assume, self-included, that'd be a place like West Virginia or Arkansas, or deep in the woods of Maine. It's not. It's here in the heart of the most expensive and richest city in the world. Talk about economic disparity. So you kind of couple in, folks who are first-generation Americans, folks who are working, perhaps under the table, folks who just don't have a lot of means or the primary makeup of your congregation, in a place where a 2-bedroom apartment costs $3,000 a month. It didn't take a rocket science to realize, I'm probably going to have to get a job outside of being a pastor. And that's what I've done. For the past 7 years, I've had a full-time marketplace job in addition to pastoring my congregation. And I had some mentors and advisors tell me, hey, you know what, given what's happening with COVID-19, churches shrinking, less giving coming in, the younger generation, millennials and Gen Zers not being as engaged in congregational life like their parents and grandparents were, I think what you've done in New York City is what more pastors are going to be experiencing in the decades to come, where they're going to have a source of income beyond the local church to support their living. I just spoke to a pastor today. He's out in St. Louis, Missouri, and he told me something that was pretty poignant. He said, I didn't get into ministry to become rich, but I also didn't get into ministry to stay poor. And he's a pastor who's 36 years old and is looking at his retirement account and realizing, you know what, I can't do this for 25 more years. It's not feasible. So what I do is I come alongside and I help pastors rebrand and remessage their skills that they've acquired in ministry to get a job in the marketplace, to build a ministry of sustainability without the stress of money.
Now, it's interesting, that pastor you spoke of about, what was the words? I didn't get into this to be poor.
Oh, yeah, I didn't get into this to be rich, but I also didn't get into it to stay poor. Like, I didn't think I'd be looking down the pike at 40 years old and realizing I have $0 in net worth.
Yeah. I mean, I think our Catholic brethren, right? They literally take a vow of poverty, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. And I know in many churches, the lay people, the folks of the church, kind of implicitly expect the pastor to be poor or of modest means. I literally had this, and part of the reason I want to have you on for our listeners' sake is, like, I've been wrestling with this myself, of thinking, like, boy, I need to get another 20, 25 years out of a career. And based on the trends where I see church headed, especially in my neck of the woods, in mainline Protestant context in the Denver metro area of Colorado, like, there's just not a lot of growth. A lot of churches are really struggling with their budgets. And I think even broadly speaking, unless you're working in a big mega evangelical church, you're probably not going to be making a big income. And even then, that's questionable, right?
Right.
So your solution is to help people get corporate jobs. So talk more about that, what that looks like.
Yeah. So really, and it's funny you said that, Lauren, because I've spoken to not really senior pastors, but staff pastors at mega evangelical churches in the South. And it is shocking. You think of these big buildings and these big budgets and, all the bells and whistles, and they'll call me and say, yeah, I'm making $38,000 a year as a youth pastor, and I'm 36 years old. I'm like, okay, you're not making much, even though you're at a multi-million-dollar church.
Right.
But that's neither here nor there. So yeah, my solution, really the typical model we think of that bivocational pastor who says, like, I'm going to go get a job until my church or my ministry gets large enough to support me full time. But I'm getting a job because I have to, not because I want to. And I really want to help change the conversation to more of what's called a co-vocational model. And I can't take credit for this. This is Brad Briscoe's stuff. You can check out his resources, but his philosophy, and I'm on board with it, I think it makes a lot of sense, is what would happen if Christian ministers said, hey, all of my life is a ministry, right? Whether I'm working a job and also pastoring a church part-time, it doesn't matter. It's all ministry. It's all God's calling and anointing on my life. So a co-vocational pastor is not a person that says, I'm going to do this and suck it up for a few years till my church is big enough. A co-vocational pastor is a pastor who says, my job, my marketplace, experience is an extension of my ministry, and I intend to do both this and be a minister in the church indefinitely for as long as the Lord allows me to.
So let me ask this. It's a bit out of order here than what I was planned, but I think what came to mind for me immediately, and I think this is one of the things that I'm wrestling with in my own life, and I've seen it elsewhere, is like the drawbacks of bivocationality or co-vocationality. I mean, for fact of the matter, there's only so many hours in a day, so many days in a week, so many hours in a week. How do you manage, especially with, back when I was leading a new church start, kind of in the middle of COVID, I kind of saw the writing on the wall, like, I'm going to need some other source of income. So I applied for like a chaplain job. And obviously this was like a job within my kind of skill set and my specialty as a hospital chaplain, but also it was like incredibly demanding work. Now I was working during COVID. So can you talk about those drawbacks and how you advise pastors and clergy to handle those?
Yeah, definitely. Well, the thing of it is, I say for a pastor who's looking to become co-vocational, look for jobs that are low stress. So chaplain is not low stress. It's a very high stress job.
Yeah.
Look for jobs, with medium pay. Like, don't go become a greeter at Walmart, but don't think you're going to become the, C-level leader at a large company, kind of middle of the road tier, but look for jobs with high flexibility. So one of the blessings that came out of COVID is that more and more workplaces are realizing the value of having a remote workforce or a hybrid workforce. So just to give you like a perfect case study, right now in New York, it's 11:17 in the morning and I'm on a phone call with you, but it's a Thursday and I'm technically on the clock. And granted, if someone calls me or reaches out quickly with an emergency, I can go ahead and take it, but I can probably count on one hand the number of times that has happened. People have this perception about the knowledge economy and working, that you're like behind a desk chained there from 8 to 5 all day, every day. That might have been the case 40 years ago in the 1980s, but in the modern workforce, a lot of companies are like, listen, just get your job done, get it done on time, get it done to this quality, and we're okay. And I think that's really freeing and liberating for a lot of pastors and a lot of people who are seeking that sort of employment.
Yeah. What are, like, practically speaking, I remember listening to an episode on this from like Tom Rainier, however you say his name. Cause they suggest, like, I remember like UPS. What are some other like practical jobs, you think folks might consider?
Yeah. I mean, the framework that I provide to pastors when they're kind of discerning what their next move might be is, it's a bit lengthy, but I'll try to summarize it quickly. I always say the job search does not start with what jobs are available. It starts with how God has wired you. And I think it's really hard for a lot of pastors to do that introspective work, to say, I've only ever saw myself as a pastor. I've never seen myself as anything else. So my framework is the head, the heart, the hands, the feet. So the head frameworks is a person. If you're a person who you might be this, Lauren, because I see a pile of books behind you. If you're somebody who's very academic, you love reading, you love writing, you love research, you love teaching, you love facilitating, you love coaching, you love that. Learning and development is a fabulous career path to explore for a pastor that has that skill set. That's how I broke into the corporate world, is through L&D, learning and development. That's the head. If you go down to the heart is a person who's compassionate, has a lot of empathy, caring, loving, what have you. That's a not-for-profit job. That is probably the easiest job for a pastor to transition into because,
Mm-hmm.
churches are not-for-profits. A lot of Christians work in not-for-profits. Pay isn't great, but of course, you're doing
Right.
high-impact work that you can believe in. If you go down to your hands, if you like fixing, tinkering, juggling, all sorts of different tasks, duties, and responsibilities, project management is a career path that pastors can look into and explore. Very high demand. There's really excellent certifications out there you can earn, put on your resume. And then if you go all the way down to your feet, if you're somebody who's active, you like moving, you like being busy, you like a lot going on, you don't mind, being on the go, consider sales. I know a lot of
Hmm.
pastors think sales is a dirty word, but it's
Right.
helped a lot of pastors get jobs where they realize, you know what? I used to think sales was that greasy used car salesman who's strong arming someone to buy a car they don't really want or need. But ultimately, if you can believe in the service or product you're selling and you actually believe with conviction it's helping solve a problem for the person at the other end of the phone call or meeting, it can be a
Right.
very fulfilling and very lucrative path for someone to explore as a career.
Yeah, that's a helpful model. Those four aspects. It's funny, you're not even seeing here, Eric, like the pile of books to my right. But like for me, I'm definitely on the introvert side of the spectrum. Me doing a sales job would just wear me out, and I'd have nothing left for like trying to pitch my church or interact with people in a ministry context. But and frankly, I don't know if I'd necessarily want to do something hard because I want to save something for I want to save my heart for ministry, perhaps, so to speak. But like head and hands, I could probably do. I mean, I've officiated sports, high school sports for several years, many years, just as like another kind of income stream. So it's technically I guess it's feet, right? But anyway, probably plays into the model. So let's talk practically speaking. So certainly in my context, and I imagine it's broadly speaking, even in very other contexts, is getting like an MDiv is a significant time and financial investment. In a previous episode I had with two authors, Josh Packard and Todd Ferguson, they talked about clergy seeing an MDiv as a quote worthless degree. And I can't say I haven't felt similarly at times. In their book, they talk about like someone applying for a job for like a Parks and Rec department as a youth pastor, someone who had been a youth pastor applying for Parks and Rec job, and they couldn't figure out, like they got turned down because the critique was like, you don't have experience, and they're like, that's all I do all day is like plan events and games and whatever. So how do you handle, what do you recommend to people like who have like an MDiv or an MS or what's the MA, I guess, some kind of theological higher ed degree, to translate that to, obviously non-church contexts?
Yeah, I mean, really, this might surprise some of your listeners, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyways. When I build a resume for a pastor who's looking to get a marketplace job, I put their educational credentials at the very bottom. So I know that might hurt some people's feelings. Like, oh my gosh, I spent $60,000 in 3 years of my life getting that MDiv, and you're going to have that be the last thing about me. At the end of the day, for better or worse, companies look at a hire as, can you do the job, to the point of the Parks and Recs person. So what I would do is I would highlight those transferable skills at the top, event planning and stakeholder engagement, budget. It's like all these things that you've done as a youth pastor, just highlight those at the top, and like the MDiv at the bottom can just be the cherry on top. Because by the time they get to that, they think, we really want to bring this person in because they presented their skills as neatly transferable. Unfortunately, a lot of pastors, and I get it, I have a seminary degree too, they think that's the most important thing about them. And maybe that is if you're applying for a church job. But if you're looking at the marketplace job, they want to see, do you have the skills and experience to get the job done? Make that the forefront of your resume, not the, degree you've earned in ancient biblical studies like I did. So yeah, my master's of arts in biblical literature has not worked very well in corporate Manhattan life.
Now, I think it's funny just because we're probably, practically speaking, someone needs to have at least 2 different resumes then, yes? Like a,
Sure. I mean, the thing of it is with resumes that some of your listeners may or may not know is that every resume you submit should be targeted for the job that you're applying to.
yeah.
There's a program called the Applicant Tracking System, ATS, and that actually reads your resume. It's AI that reads your resume before a human ever sees it. So if you don't have the keywords on your resume for that job, the odds of you getting a call back are extremely, extremely low. That's one of the things that I coach pastors on is like, you just can't have your led Bible studies, did funerals, did weddings,
Right.
X, Y, and Z,
Right.
because you did those things, yes, and that's valuable, but that's not what they're looking for on the resume.
Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful. That's helpful for sure. So let's say we can get through the applicant tracking system, get through the computers, you get to a person. Again, this quote came from a book. A pastor was saying that, saying that I worked for a church, saying I went to seminary is like saying the same thing as like I went to Hogwarts. Like it's just a cross-cultural mismatch.
Yeah.
How do you advise pastors when they're trying to have a conversation with a company, HR, interview, whatever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the first thing is when you're in an interview, you should never bash or pick on your previous employer or what you've done in the past. The thing about like pastoral interviews, I've noticed I've interviewed at 2 different churches and gotten jobs is there's a very high expectation that you as a candidate come in with a good dose of humility, which rightfully so, right? Our Lord was humble. He washed feet. You want to be humble when you come in to become someone's new pastor or youth pastor or whatever. When you walk into the marketplace, what they want to see is confidence. They want you to walk in with the confidence to say, hey, listen, I can do this job. I've done some more stuff in the past. So what I kind of coach pastors to do is frame the conversation like this. Say, hey, listen, I went to seminary. I spent these years working in the church. These are some of the things I did. I got into that line of work because I wanted to help people, get back to my community. I sense that I did that. I'm going to continue to do that, but I sense myself doing that more on a volunteer basis moving forward. And I really think my next challenge and opportunity is in a place like this, and kind of really keep the conversation focused on the future together. You and that company partnering together with you as their newest hire, and not dwell on, well, I was a youth pastor for 8 years and I made $30,000 a year, and my wife said, get out of ministry or I'm leaving you. Like, don't say that in the job interview. Say it was a positive experience. I learned a lot. This is why I did it. And this is why I think my next opportunity, what I want my next opportunity to look like.
So practically speaking, what do you say to pastors? Like, what can they reasonably expect to be able to give to a church? Even, if they're trying to maintain some kind of connect or functionality in a church setting.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I advise pastors to do is I would advise them to sit down with a piece of paper and say, what can only I do? Let's call them 1. What can I give away? Let's call them 2. And what can be completely eliminated? Let's call them 3. And they'll be pretty humbled within the first 15, 20 minutes when they realize that column on the left, what can only I do? It's pretty short. There'd be 2 or 3 things. And I think for a lot of pastors, we've gotten ourselves so conditioned that we are the end-all, be-all face of the church for everything and everyone. I had a situation happen in my church where a member was pretty sick. I asked another member, hey, can you make this member some soup and bring it over to her apartment and just check in on her? And that was, me equipping the saints, delegating, kind of sharing the load of pastoral care. In a previous life, Eric would have made the soup. Eric would have gone to the apartment. Eric would have spent half the day caring for this person. And as much as I enjoyed that, and I feel like that's part of my job when it needs to be, I also know that the scripture calls us as ministers to be equippers of the saints. And I think if you're a pastor who you have to have your fingers in everything from preaching on Sundays to ordering the coffee on Amazon, it'd be very hard for you to be a bivocational or co-vocational leader.
Yeah, that's good. I'm just thinking out loud here. I can imagine only in a few contexts where there's really only certain things that only the pastor can do. I mean, again, depending on denominational or liturgical context, some denominations like only clergy can serve communion, for instance. But even more and more church contexts allow lay people or empowering lay people to preach, non-clergy folks. So there's really, there's so much It is hard. And maybe that gets into something, you talked about earlier, Eric, of not wrapping your identity too much around what you do.
Mm.
So I guess I'll leave it there. Something that I think that has, again, spurred my interest in this conversation is just this kind of sense that this is the future. You talked about earlier, for many, many years, I shouldn't say for many years, for several years, I heard folks saying like, oh, the era of like a professional pastor is really contextually, at least in America, like it's a modern invention, so to speak, kind of a post-war, a relic of kind of post-war America that really doesn't exist anymore. And I kind of fought it and resisted it for a while. But the last 3, 4, 5 years, it's just become really obvious for me. And as I see like more and more churches struggle with their budgets, pastors struggling with trying to earn enough money, like I don't know like what your thoughts are in like broader evangelical world. In mainline world, I really think like this is going to be the future. Like, what are your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish I could speak with some level of expertise on, the history of all that. I can't, so I won't speak out of depth. I don't want someone to send me an angry email, which would be a righteous anger because they know better than I do. But to me, I look at my context, New York City, Denver, Seattle, San Francisco. These are canaries in the coal mine culturally.
Yeah.
I mean, what's happening in our cities is what's going to happen in suburban communities and then eventually into small towns. And I look at a place like New York City where I am, and I don't know many pastors who that is their full-time job. That's what they do. Cost of living is extremely high. Rent for a facility is extremely high. People don't necessarily have the income to just give substantially to their congregation. So unless it's a historical church with a wealthy endowment, and which many evangelical churches are not.
Right.
Pastors do have to be either bivocational. Often I'll see it where the spouse will work and they'll kind of support the ministry spouse while they do their ministry, which can create some complex dynamics within their relationship.
100%.
Yeah. Speaking from experience, I mean,
Speaking from experience.
Yes. And I mean, I'll be honest, man, when I was a youth pastor, my wife was and still is an RN. And yeah, I would probably say 2/3 of our income came from her and 1/3 came from me. And thankfully, I'm secure enough in my masculinity that it didn't bother me too much. But at the same time, when our children came along, she's like, I want to work less. Okay, fair enough. So we had to make some changes in our life. So, but yeah, man, I think that, you look at places like Denver, like New York, like these large, cities, okay, but this is happening in 2023 in these places. What's going to happen in, small town Main Street, USA in 10 years. It's kind of what I'm looking at from more of a futuristic perspective than a past perspective.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife's an RN too. And, I mean, I think, again, that's kind of shaped my kind of ministry career outlook, is that like, she's the breadwinner, so to speak. Again, have my own kind of humility in that. She's the breadwinner. Like, I have to make my ministry job career calls kind of based around like that. She's providing the vast majority of my family's income. So that's definitely, again, I think, a challenge that's going to become more and more prevalent in the future. So let me ask you, more theoretically speaking, this question. So again, I come from I work in a mainline Protestant context where the value of theological degrees is often a requirement for ordination. Certainly, at least it sounds like to me from an outside perspective, in evangelical circles, there's really been a valuing of the MDiv, in many evangelical spaces as well. But I wonder, again, like, this is something I had, asked previous guests, like, do denominations, do networks, do churches need to reevaluate? Like, boy, are we asking too much for people to go for an MDiv? Because from my perspective, like, it's not even necessarily like the money. I mean, certainly the money is, I was very fortunate, and got a scholarship for the vast majority of my educational expenses, for seminary, but many people aren't so fortunate. But I think more so, I think about like committing 3 or 4 years of my prime kind of career
Mhm.
growth time, my late 20s, where it could have been like advancing in a career or, working on an MBA, which coincidentally I just finished here 10 years later, 15
Congrats.
years later. But like that's a real, it's a real challenge. What do you think, broadly speaking?
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, I agree with you, man. I think that the proposition to tell a person, 25-year-old, let's say, hey, uproot your
Right.
life, move to this city that you don't know a single soul,
Right.
find an apartment or, on campus living, shell out, 60, 70, 80K for a 3-year degree. And,
Hmm.
I understand the value because what I think seminary did for me is it taught me how to think.
Yeah.
It taught me how
Yeah.
to analyze complex ideas and make them succinct and simple, and that's a skill that has served me very well both in ministry and the marketplace. So I suppose you were to put value on that. I got my money's worth from that perspective. Um, but like that model of saying, "Hey, upper your life, pay all this money, live here, commit 3 to 4 years of your, like you said, your prime time of your 20s, where you
Hmm.
can be building your career to this for a career that I don't know what it is in your world, but for my world, like a pastor of a medium-sized church, I mean, the cap they're ever going to earn,
Right.
is 75K a year, maybe
Yeah.
85K a year. It's like
Yeah.
that's it. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a I don't want to be crass 'cause I love seminary. I love my friends that work and engage in that space, but it's a lousy business proposition.
Yeah.
If we're gonna use those terms,
Yeah. Yeah.
do
I
all
mean,
that for a job that at max will pay you 85K a year.
I'll say it more harshly, and I say this with great grief because of I mean, I love the church. I can say without a doubt my deep love for the church, but you know, recently came to me like this is a dying industry. And I don't mean that like
Mhm,
that. I don't mean like the Church of Jesus Christ is dying or the gospel is dying, but the institution of or the economic institution of churches being able to pay clergy well, like
mhm,
that is dying.
mhm,
Um, and in some sense, again, like you said, it's kind of like a dead end job. And I mean, again, not that it's not a place without life and purpose and meaning. I mean, I believe in all those things, but like you said, like there's a low ceiling in the vast majority context of what you can earn. I mean, I have a friend in ministry who like he hasn't gotten raised in like 7 years.
sure, and look at how inflation has gone up in the last 7 years.
Oh my goodness, right? So I mean, he's taking it in the chin every year. Um, So obviously, one thing I'd recommend folks to do is connect with you, and I'll give you an opportunity here to pitch your website or whatever. But one thing I did see on Twitter, you said somewhat recently, is you talked about like this is not like a month or 3 month effort. This is a long term shift. So talk about some first steps clergy can make here.
Mhm. Yeah, well, first of all, I wanna tell a joke, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I had a pastoral friend tell me this one. He said, "Seminaries are training people to open Blockbuster videos."
Hmm.
I was like, "Wow, that's
Okay.
a pretty dark joke, but I kinda like it." And,
I need to write that down for the show notes
yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah. The seminaries are training people to open Blockbuster videos because to your point, Lauren, is it a dying industry in terms of, imagine going to law school, similar kind of commitment, and think about the endless opportunities you might have as a lawyer. There's so many different fields you can and domains you can go. And anyways, that's neither here nor there. We won't
Right.
we won't dwell there. But yes, the biggest thing, man, when I work with pastors, it's not helping them find jobs, it's helping them find themselves.
Hmm.
It's helping them
Wow.
understand who am I removed from this office that I've committed the last 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, in some cases, years of my life to. And it's really kind of getting to the meat of how has God made me? How am I wired? What is, my life going to look like, the 2.0 version of it. And that's been the most fun part and the most challenging part to kind of
Hmm.
untangle that. Unfortunately, some pastors have this idea that hey, I led a church, people showed up to hear me preach. I had a volunteer staff, I had a budget that I managed, I had a board that reported to me. Why can't I get a $70,000 a year job at XYZ corporation? They can't fathom that. And the
Right.
reason why is because they don't know how to present themselves as a candidate for that role. They're
Mm-hmm.
still in the mindset of, I'm a pastor and I do all these pastoral things. You have to reposition yourself to say, no, I'm a whatever it is, project manager that can, streamline
Mm-hmm.
systems and build processes. I'm a learning development professional that can build curriculum and coach leaders and people managers. I'm a nonprofit professional that can raise, revenue for the efforts of this organization. Like whatever it is, like you have to begin to rebrand yourself.
Right.
But you
Right.
can't do that until you first look in and say, how has God wired me?
Hmm.
And what skills and talents do I have that the marketplace will pay a lot of money for? Until you figure that out, man, it's an uphill battle.
That's good stuff. Well, I shouldn't be surprised here. I shouldn't be surprised we're a little early because you're a New Yorker, fast talker, East Coaster.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So why don't we take a break here? Let's take a break. We'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Eric Hoke. So enjoying the conversation. Hope it's helpful for our listeners. Appreciate your time and thoughts here. So these closing questions, I always tell folks you can take these as seriously or not as you'd like to. But if you're Pope for a day, what does a day look like for you? What do you want to do?
If I'm the Pope for the day, man, you know what I'd love to do? I'm gonna be very silly here for the first one.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for it to be like a holiday for all the churches in your town or your community to all meet up and do nothing but eat ice cream, play
Mm-hmm.
games, have fun, have bounce houses for the kids. No, no serious talk allowed, and just enjoy each other. Man, like that'd be really cool. That was a day in the Christian calendar where it was like ecumenical day, and all the churches just
Mm-hmm.
hang out somewhere, just fun for the families and everyone that's there. Maybe some music, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. That's what I would do. I'd pronounce ecumenical day. We can say it's today. Well, actually, it's ironic because you're from Denver. Today is 420,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we won't make it today. We'll go ahead and make it a day
No comment.
in
No
July.
comment, Eric.
We'll make it a day in July or August.
Boy, even in our current context, I'm like, boy, I don't know if some churches just still be like, no, I'm not going to show up. Kids, ice cream. I don't believe in that.
I don't
Can't
believe
hang out with
kids
those
ice cream
kids and ice
having
cream.
fun. No way. Yeah.
I'm a theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life.
Oh man. So I'm gonna go ahead and say my favorite author I've been reading a lot of lately is Eugene Peterson. He recently
Mm-hmm.
passed away a few years back. I know he's not really a historical figure, he's a
Sure.
modern figure,
Sure.
but man, I just love his stuff. I had a friend give me his book, Letters to a Young Pastor, and curiously enough, his son's name is Eric. So I feel like it was like God's special gift to me because he writes "Dear Eric" and then writes like a letter.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually just read that this past month. I'm like, oh man, what I'd give just to have a day with Eugene.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Oh man, I think that they'll look back at this time as people were extremely divided.
Mm-hmm.
People were extremely angry, and curiously enough, I had this conversation with I work with young adults, predominantly from underrepresented
Mm-hmm.
populations in my day job, and they asked a question. I have them ask like these kind of deeper questions, get to know each other, and majority are young adults of color. And one of the questions that was asked was, if you could return to any era, what would it be? And one of the young adults said, I want to go back to the 1970s because there was no racism then. And everyone's kind of like, what? Sure,
Mm-hmm.
there was. There was plenty of racism in the 1970s. What are you talking about? Then someone else made a comment and they said, yeah, but it was isolated, right? It wasn't on the internet. It wasn't in your face. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
all, you pull up your phone, look at TikTok and see something
Right.
derogatory. I mean, it would happen, of course, and it still does, but it wasn't everywhere. I thought, wow, how fascinating that, some African American, young man said, I want to go back 50 years when there was less racism. That's scary.
Yeah, that is scary. Wow. Wow. That's sobering words here. What are your hopes for the future of Christianity?
Man, my hopes is that the dynamic and dichotomy of the clergy laity divide would be flattened. That pastors would not be seen as these people on a pedestal who are in their ivory towers and separate from the everyday working person. I would hope that pastors would say, just as God has called me to a ministry, he's called you, layperson in the pew, to a ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And that we would see more churches that were mobilized and maximized to be on mission together. I believe a lot of churches I've worked at, it's that Pareto principle, the 80-20 principle,
Yeah.
where 20% of the folks were kind of engaged and giving, serving, volunteering, were part of the community, and 80% or more passive spectators. And it was, I know you and I are both Yankees fans, so it was like you and I going to a Yankees game. Like we're just watching the game. We're not really doing much. And I would hope that we'd see more people on the field playing, engaged in the mission that God has for them. But I think a big part of that is this conversation, Lauren, about co-vocational ministry. And I've seen this in my own life, man. Our church was mobile. We didn't have a physical location. So we had to set up and tear down every single week. And we never had a problem getting folks to do that. And I can't help but wonder if part of it was people realized, hey, you know what? Pastor Eric is going to get up tomorrow morning, shower, shave, put on his work clothes, hop on a subway, go to an office, just like I am. So who am I to, ditch this and go hurry up to the place for lunch? I'm going to stay here and get in the trenches too and help tear down the service. And I really hope that, what I'm putting out there and how I'm supporting pastors can help bring about that change and that more Christians will be mobilized to live on mission.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, share your website or whatever, how folks can get in touch with you.
Yeah, the website's really simple. It's called ihelppastorsgetjobs.com. That shares more about what we do. There's a link there to schedule a free discovery call where you can spend some time with our team, kind of sharing your thoughts if you like to transition into a marketplace role. There's also a free PDF that I put together as well, kind of A to Z, how to rebrand yourself. And if you really want to hear some very corny, cheesy takes, you can follow me on Twitter at my name, which is Eric Hoke, ERICHOKE.
Do you have a story, real quick story of someone you've helped recently get a job?
Yeah, actually, it's really funny because I just got an email from this guy last night. He was a pastor in Florida. He was originally from Omaha, Nebraska. He wanted to move back to Omaha to be closer to his family, but he had to find a marketplace job to do that. Because the thing about ministry that is, maybe it's dark and dirty secret, maybe it's not, but you kind of have to live where there's jobs. And sometimes it takes you to places you want to go, and other times it doesn't.
Or you're like me and live where there's no jobs.
Or you live where there's no jobs. Exactly. So he decided he wanted to kind of uproot, and I loved it. I mean, he was not a young guy. He was well into his 50s, and he's like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I miss my family. I miss my life back in Omaha. So funny thing with his story was we spent a lot of time working together, did a resume for him. He ended up not using our resume, which is kind of comical, but getting the job anyways. But the thing that he said that helped him the most was the mindset. That I do deserve, this opportunity. I am the right candidate for this role. I do have the skills and abilities to do this job with excellence. And he had reached out to me just last night and told me that he got a job on the director of development for Habitat for Humanity. So it'll be fundraising for that not-for-profit. So leaving vocational church ministry to go work at a really, outstanding not-for-profit back in his hometown. He's really excited. I'm excited for him.
Well, it really speaks to like your point you made earlier about churches expecting humility. And I guess this is a nonprofit, but I still think like they're going to know, Habitat for Homes is going to want to know you can help bring in some cash if you're working on a development team. So they're going to want some confidence. Well, this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate your time. Always leave folks with a word of peace. So word of peace, I want to say go Yankees too. So go Yankees, and then may God's peace be with you.
Amen. Also with you, brother.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.